Japan and the Philippines are both committed to diplomacy with China, but it looks like the CCP is finding out the hard way that they're not pushovers. Welcome to China Uncensored, I'm Chris Chappell. Real quick before I begin, 5 years ago, Matt Shelley and I were in Hong Kong, watching 2 million people march through the streets to protest the Hong Kong government and ultimately the CCP. So to commemorate it, China Uncensored is partnering with the Hong Kong Democracy Council to create the first ever digital Hong Kong Lenin Wall, a place for people around the world to show their support for Hong Kongers by writing digital post-it notes of support for Hong Kong. Again, that website is hkleninwall.com. I'll leave a link below. We built this site with a team of security experts. It's completely anonymous. It does not track cookies or any other personal information. It does not store IP addresses. Our goal was to get 10,000 unique posts by the end of June. But you guys have already smashed through that. If you've already signed, thank you. Please ask your friends and family to sign as well. Let's see how many we can get. And now, on to the rest of the show. So last week, the Chinese Coast Guard launched their craziest attack yet against the Filipino military on the Second Thomas Shoal. They even used knives and axes to intimidate the sailors and puncture rubber boats. The arrogance of the Chinese Communist Party was on full display with this attack because it came shortly after the president of the Philippines, Ferdinand Marcos Jr., said at the Shangri-La Security Conference in Singapore that if any Filipino was killed by China in such an attack, it would be very close to an act of war. So if 2 Filipinos were killed, would it be very, very close to an act of war? When do we actually get to an actual act of war? Luckily, nobody was killed. China basically did that annoying kids game of, I'm not touching you, but with blades. I'm not stabbing you, I'm not stabbing you. After the attack, Marcos reiterated, as he had at the conference, that Manila remains committed to diplomacy with Beijing in order to resolve various disputes between the two countries, which is noble, but unfortunately using diplomacy with Beijing is often as effective as using tickling to stop a runaway freight train. He said that the Philippines won't back down, but that it won't start a war. President Marcos flew with some of his top security officials to Palawan, which faces the South China Sea, where the Philippines military chief, General Romeo Bronner Jr., awarded medals to some of the service members involved in the Chinese attack. Bronner pointed out that the sailors who came under attack from the Chinese Coast Guard were using their bare hands to push back the knife and axe-wielding attackers. I've heard of don't bring a knife to a gunfight, but what are the rules about bringing your dukes to a knife wavy aroundy? While on Palawan, Marcos gave a speech to Filipino military personnel saying, "We are not in the business to instigate wars. In defending the nation, we stay true to our Filipino nature that we would like to settle all these issues peacefully." Marcos also said, "We made a conscious and deliberate choice to remain in the path of peace." To which Beijing said, "Hey, we're peaceful. Look, we're not stabbing you. We're not stabbing you." To underscore these points, despite the condemnation of the CCP's behavior by several Western countries and other key allies of Manila, key advisors to President Marcos said he had no plan to invoke the country's mutual defense treaty with the United States in response. The Philippines is Washington's oldest treaty ally in Asia, so the White House has warned repeatedly that it's obligated to defend the island country should it come under attack from the CCP. Apparently, this doesn't count as coming under attack. Maybe that's why the CCP is sticking with more dangerous yet non-lethal versions of annoying kids' pranks like super soakers and I'm not touching you. What's next? Are they going to use lasers to give Indian arm burns? If all this sounds a bit like backing down, just wait. Because the Philippines Executive Secretary initially said that the whole episode was probably a misunderstanding or an accident, and that the country would give advance notice of resupply missions in the future. Although the Philippines Defense Secretary quickly walked that back. Whoopsie. China hasn't yet commented on Marcos' speech. The US and China ostensibly remain committed to talks to resolve diplomatic issues. So the White House is pressuring many of its other allies in both Europe and the Indo-Pacific to pursue diplomatic means to address concerns with China. This is all pretty concerning. The US and its allies have been dedicated to the strategy of talks with China for decades, hoping it would lead to a shift in behavior from the government, but that hasn't happened, which means They just need to keep trying and hoping harder. I'm sure that shift is coming any day now. The only shift in behavior has been to increase the amount of human rights violations and regional aggression. Still, the Philippines and other small countries have no choice but to follow the U.S.'s lead here, since they heavily rely on the American military and economy to protect them. That doesn't mean that the Philippines or other countries are surrendering to Xi Jinping, though. Marcos also mentioned in his speech, for example, that his country is standing firm. He added, "Our calm and peaceful disposition should not be mistaken for acquiescence. History itself can tell that we have never in the history of the Philippines yielded to any foreign power. Like Teddy Roosevelt said, speak softly and carry a big stick, especially when someone's playing, 'I'm not stabbing you.'" That's something that another country can attest to. When Japan expressed serious concern over the attack in the Philippines, China lashed out and said Tokyo had no right to intervene. Yeah, I mean, it's not like China would ever force itself into the politics of another sovereign nation. Nope, not once, not ever. A spokesperson for the Chinese embassy in Japan said that China was lodging a solemn protest over the Japanese government once again making remarks on the South China Sea, making mischief and turning black and white upside down, while accusing China unreasonably in spite of truth. Yes, because it's unreasonable to ever suggest that the Chinese Communist Party is a regime hell-bent on intimidating its neighbors and its citizens. Nope, not once, not ever. But wait, I thought China and Japan were working on bettering their relationship. There was even a meeting about this in Seoul not long ago. That's because when it comes to keeping its promises, China has the memory of a goldfish with dementia that just doesn't pay attention when you're talking to it. How inconsiderate. The U.S., a close ally of both Seoul and Tokyo, even said amidst the summit that it expects both countries to manage ties with China despite growing differences, just as the U.S. does. Washington said that it respects the ability of nations to make sovereign decisions in the best interests of their people, and that just as the United States takes steps to responsibly manage our relationship with the PRC, so do our partners and allies. Which is the diplomatic way of saying, please don't invoke your treaties with us, we beg you. We've got enough on our plate. Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida told a parliamentary meeting in April that China and Japan will comprehensively promote a mutually beneficial strategic relationship by continuing dialogue at all levels, including the summit level. There's just one problem. China's Coast Guard is at it again, this time in the East China Sea, around the disputed Senkaku Islands, which China calls Diaoyu. That dispute has been going on for years, but on Monday, China claimed it drove away Japanese boats in the area. The Coast Guard said that between June 20th and 24th, they took necessary control measures against and drove away 4 Japanese fishing vessels and several patrol boats that entered waters Beijing claims as its own. I'm sensing 2 patterns here. One is the U.S. continuing to heap pressure on their allies to responsibly manage their relations with Beijing rather than the other way around. And the other is the CCP's totally predictable behavior of undermining those relations, which means they're obviously not trying and hoping hard enough. Keep at it. I'm sure that shift in behavior is coming any day now. The Chinese Coast Guard issued an additional statement saying they urged Japan to immediately cease all illegal activities in the area and ensure similar incidents do not recur. Japan, of course, reports the story a bit differently, pointing out that China has been repeatedly violating Japanese waters near the islands. It's like they say, there are 3 sides to every story, with the third side being the truth, and one of them being the word of a human rights abusing authoritarian regime that calls the truth a slanderous lie. The way Japan tells it, in the 21st official Chinese intrusion this year, 3 Haijing ships tried to approach a Japanese fishing boat with Japanese Coast Guard patrol vessels warning them to leave the waters. I'm not on your side of the bed. Japan has other reasons to be angry with China right now. In China's Suzhou, a man has been arrested for another knife attack, this time on a Japanese woman and her child. The incident occurred at a bus stop for a Japanese school, and Japan's embassy issued a warning to its nationals residing in China, urging them to exercise caution after a spate of stabbing incidents. The CCP has called the incident regrettable and is launching an investigation, but some appear to think this attack was a hate crime, which is possible considering the rampant anti-Japan propaganda and protests the CCP has popularized over the years. It's Almost as if you teach people to hate the Japanese, they just might start hating the Japanese. Japan isn't taking any of this lying down. It's decided to sanction Chinese firms that it alleges are supporting Russia's war on Ukraine. This is the first time Japan has done this since the war began in early 2022. The move means that Japanese companies are prohibited from exporting goods to the sanctioned firms, including Hong Kong-based Asia Pacific Links Limited and the Shenzhen-based Ilufa Electronics Limited. On top of that, the U.S. is trying to enlist the help of both Holland and Japan in further restricting chip-making equipment to China. Couldn't happen to a nicer human rights-abusing authoritarian regime. This is part of an effort to expand a 2023 agreement between the three countries to keep chip-making equipment from China that could help to modernize the People's Liberation Army. Japan's industry ministry didn't comment on the talks besides saying that they had occurred. Man, I wish I could be that vague while reporting the news. Things happened and people reacted. Good night and good luck. But it's hard for China's neighbors to make a strategy to combat the CCP when the U.S., which doesn't have to deal with these in-your-face confrontations, is potentially hamstringing them with an endless parade of talks. That's why we need your support. Join me in the chant to show the CCP that we're not afraid. One way you can do that is by visiting hklenonwall.com and leaving a post-it note for Hong Kong. Doing this project and the whole show would not have been possible without the support of viewers like you on the crowdfunding website patreon.com/China Uncensored. You can contribute however much you want, but could even be as little as $1 an episode. Every bit helps. It's what makes projects like the Digital Lenin Wall possible. And the CCP is taking notice. That's why Chinese state-run media has called China Uncensored disgraceful anti-China garbage. So join what I call the China Uncensored 50-cent army on Patreon. As a thank you to everyone who gives on Patreon, I'll respond to one of your questions or comments at the end of these episodes. Today's comes from James Wahlberg. Question: with how dependent North Korea is on doing business with the CCP, when a new government takes over, if they decide not to aid it, how long do you think North Korea would last? Brilliant question, James. Really, the Chinese Communist Party is behind so many bad things in the world today. I've made entire episodes talking about the CCP's connection to drug cartels and human trafficking. A lot of the bad guys of the world rely on the CCP's patronage, just like North Korea. I'd say with the war in Ukraine, even Russia is now heavily dependent on the CCP. So if the CCP goes down, the whole world gets better fast. Thanks for your question and your support, James. Join James on Patreon by clicking that orange button. And I also have another video I'd like you to watch. This one. I'm trying to get around YouTube censorship by hiding controversial topics in gaming content. In Elden Ring, Shadow of the Erd Tree, the world is run by aging political leaders who have been in charge forever and demand utter loyalty and faith in them while making the people of the land fight each other. Yep, I wonder if there's anything to say about modern America. Just click here and check it out. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. Thanks for watching China Uncensored.